Disclaimer alert, this isn't really a disclaimer, but I went and had my hair done before filming this video, which is why my hair looks amazing. But I also have no makeup on my forehead and I forgot to untuck my collar from my top. So I feel like it looks really weird, but like still a slay top nonetheless. And also make sure you stay tuned for a massive vibe giveaway. Hello. Hello everybody, I hope you're all well. If you live in any major city in the West, you will probably know about the post-pandemic popularity of running clubs. If you were to mention a running club to me, a few years ago, I would envision a group of middle-aged people, running a cheeky 5K, maybe even training up for a marathon, and then grabbing a coffee afterwards. But now, almost the genetic makeup of running clubs has completely changed. Now running clubs are hip and cool, and they're full of young and hot people. Obviously, I'm just being sarcastic, but running clubs really are the hot new thing. They are an easy way to make friends, socialize, and potentially meet the love of your life. More and more young people in their 20s are opting to join running clubs. Now, obviously, health probably plays the biggest part in all of this, or at least some part in this. People that join running clubs, they probably already ran as a hobby anyway, but we cannot deny that a lot of young people are joining running clubs for the socialization aspect of them, to make friends, and some people join running clubs to shag. Yeah, I've heard from many people in London that running clubs are the new dating apps. One thing that does make me laugh though about this notion is that what about the babes who don't look good without full glam on? Could I rock up to the running club in full glam? Would people notice? Now, the reason why this sudden sort of influx of running clubs really caught my attention, and also Leanne's attention as well, is not only has there been just a general increased interest in in-person events, running clubs, dating apps are launching running clubs, also the dating app Breeze, which we're going to talk more about, but I am also really interested in how the pandemic and the digital age has impacted the way that we make friends and friendship in general. I have been witnessing and watching and reading so much interesting discourse and conversations about Gen Z and friendship, specifically the Gen Z loneliness epidemic. This concept of emotional labor, transactionality within friendships, friendship etiquette. These are all topics that I really, really want to dive into today, and obviously tie it all together with why the hell is everybody joining a running club? What are we running from? If you listen to my podcast, you will know how much I have been speaking about friendship recently. I went through a breakup this year and my friends really pulled through during my time of need. The healing powers of platonic love, exactly. But what I find particularly interesting about these friendship conversations is sometimes there are people who complain that they're lonely or they struggle to make friends, but these are the same people who say they hate small talk and they don't owe anyone emotional labor. As you guys can probably imagine, I'm so excited to get into this. We are sitting on a 7.5k word script, girls. Grab a drink, grab a snack. We're going to be here for a while. But just before we get into it, I would love to thank Bellessa for sponsoring today's video. If you watch my content, you already know about Bellessa. They are a by women brand specializing in all things sexual wellness. Their mission is to empower everyone to embrace, explore, and celebrate their sexuality. I've worked with Bellessa for years. They really are the real deal. And I'm going to run you guys quickly through some of my favorite toys from them. Firstly, we have the Air Vibe. Not only is this a dual stimulation tool, so it covers all bases, but it is also waterproof. And one of my favorite things about all Bellessa toys is they come in very discreet casing. So not only is it easy to travel around with, the toys always stay dust-free and clean, but also they're rechargeable. What's not to love? The next two toys are my favorites because they are external toys and I am a vaginismus girly. So as you can imagine, this is my bread and butter. The first toy is the Pebble. This toy is ergonomically built to fit really comfortably into your hand, and both the suction and the vibration can be controlled independently. And there are no annoying pattern modes, if you know. And the last toy is probably the most versatile. It is the Demi Wand. As you guys can imagine, this can be used on all body types, and it has a flexible neck, which means it can reach awkward areas, and it is very, very quiet, compact, and discreet like all Bellessa toys. And very excitingly, I'm holding another giveaway with Bellessa. I've held so many giveaways with them before, and they always go down an absolute treat. Bellessa are sending out free vibrators to everybody who signs up to my giveaway giveaway. So make sure you click the link in the description to sign up. Thank you so much again, Valessa, for sponsoring today's video, and let's get into it. Why does it feel like running clubs have become so popular all of a sudden? Or more specifically, when did running clubs become so hip and trendy? Now, I would like to say that the increased popularity in running clubs is anecdotal. I don't particularly have the stats to back this up. And also, I do think it's worth noting that I may feel like running clubs are getting more popular because I'm entering my late 20s. And you know, the older you get, the more your friends just get into exercise. Like one day you blink and it is the same friends who are staying with you till 7 a.m. at the afters and now running marathons. I will say that running specifically is probably one of the least intimidating exercises. You can start it on your own. You can download apps, Couch to 5K, etc. I tried Couch to 5K and I got to 3. You know, I'm not going to harp on about why people like to run. I feel like that's quite obvious. The more people take up the exercise, the more people sign up to running clubs. You guys get the deal. But the running clubs aren't just about running. There's so much more to the ecosystem of an East London running club than just love of the run. If you already know someone who is part of a running club, joining a running club is a surefire and easy way to make friends, especially in a city where you feel like everybody already has friends. Running clubs often run socials after, either grabbing a coffee after or more likely grabbing a drink at the pub. But I think accessibility to the exercise aside here, there are two reasons why running clubs have picked up more than anything else: sober living and a lack of participation groups. I've spoken about sober living on this channel before. I spoke about it in my Brat Summer video, but with the rising costs of going on nights out, nightclubs are shutting down at a concerning rate in the UK. One nightclub shuts down every 3 days in this country. It's predicted by 2030 there won't be any nightclubs left, and councils refusing to extend alcohol licenses past midnight. It's become a pretty common and shared experience of spending upwards of 100 quid on a night out and having an average time. It's harder and harder than ever to have a good night out, so people are opting to go sober for cost, but also for their general health and also their mental health. Gen Z and millennials have become a very health conscious generation. This is, you know, partially driven by health anxiety, but it also is driven by a pursuit of beauty. Running clubs are a cheaper, less boozy and more healthy way to have essentially a big group hangout. But I do also think that running clubs are one of the very few participation groups that Gen Z and millennials feel connected to. I read a really brilliant article on The Atlantic. It's titled The Paradox of Loneliness by Olga Kazan, which I am going to reference more in this video, but something that Olga touches on is the lack of participation groups for younger generations. You know, over 20 years ago, the way that adults used to socialize was most often through participation groups, whether that was religious groups, PTA meetings, group sports, unions. But as funding for councils are being cut and also young people feel like they have less time on their hands, and also young people are opting to spend more time alone than any generation previous to them, participation in regular group activities has dipped significantly. To quote Olga Kazan for The Atlantic, another big hurdle is the time and effort it takes to schedule a gathering. In recent decades, participation in groups that allow friends to meet up easily, such as unions, civic clubs, and religious congregations, has dwindled. One of the really great things about these institutions is they regularize contact, Cox told me. You're there at the same time or for the same kind of meetings, with shared values and expectations for behavior. So it really takes a lot of the work off the plate of the individual. We're going to talk more about the rituals of friendship and the loneliness paradox later in this video. But if we carry on speaking about running clubs, we've gotten to the bottom of why people are enjoying joining running clubs so much, why they're so popular. But if we're going to talk about running clubs, we have to talk about people shagging! Now, obviously, not everyone in their running club is shagging each other. It's a joke. The internet is allergic to generalizations, but the rumors, the reputation of running clubs that they are essentially swinging clubs is so popular, so commonly held, that it's essentially an immediate association. I did put out a call on my Instagram for some of your running club stories, and I would like to say that it was a pretty evenly mixed bag. There were half of you guys telling me that you made friends in your running club, you really enjoyed your running club. A lot of women messaged me saying that they enjoyed going to women-only running clubs because they felt safe to go on late-night runs and runs in more secluded areas. You know, I know people who have made entire long-standing friendship groups through their running clubs, but also people be fucking. I know about the running club fuck boys. You guys told me about it. The shagging goes on so often that it's become like pretty well known that running clubs you guys be sleeping together? And again, if we just link this back to running clubs being one of the very few popular participation groups amongst Gen Z and millennials, it's no wonder that everybody's sleeping with each other. I'm not surprised at all that people sleep with each other, and also that people use running clubs as an alternative to dating apps. So much so that dating apps have now launched their own running clubs. Tinder launched a running club called Soulmates. You know, dating apps are really beginning to clock on to the fact that everyone is kind of exhausted of them, and they also kind of don't really work. But I read a review where Ariel Dom says she enjoyed herself and left with someone's phone number, but ended up being ghosted. So some things never change. But if we just stay on this topic for just a moment, I am really interested in how the digital age has impacted in-person events. It's very clear to me that our generation is craving regular contact with one another. They're craving some in-person events. People want to meet someone for the first time in person. And I really want to talk about the dating app Breeze, because I feel like the dating app Breeze was born of this desire, but it's kind of missed the mark. Breeze is a Dutch dating app that was launched after the pandemic, and Breeze's purpose is to address some of the inherent problems of dating apps. Matching and messaging without meeting, catfishing / the online persona not matching the real person, and online chemistry not matching in-person compatibility. If you want a name for someone who their chat was great on the dating apps, but they're naff in real life, it's Chatfish. You're welcome. How the app works is you get daily matches every day at 7 p.m. and if you match with one of them, Breeze will arrange your first date for you. You pay around £7 and you go to a bar where you claim the £7 back for a free drink. So, you know, it all levels out and essentially the money gets put in so people are less likely to cancel. It all seems like Breeze should work, and Breeze has found success in the Netherlands. But the problem is when you go on a date with someone without messaging them first, there's essentially no way to vet them, because there have been plenty of attractive people that I've matched with on dating apps, and as soon as I've started talking to them, I'm like, no. If somebody's boring me over messages, they're most likely going to bore me in real life as well, and vice versa. But in my opinion, I get where Breeze are coming from, but also they didn't really address any of the fundamental issues with dating apps, which is if you're dating someone who you have absolutely no mutual friends with, you are more likely to be treated poorly. That meeting someone via a dating app, you know, meeting a potential partner for the first time alone, one-on-one, is actually a really unnatural way to meet someone. You know, it's effectively a blind date. You just know what the person looks like. And dating apps have widened the dating pool so much that, you know, if you're essentially trying to find someone who wants a serious relationship, it can be quite difficult. But if we just bounce off Breeze and dating apps, there has actually been a rise of friend-making apps, friendship apps, friend dating apps, essentially. But the thing is that these friendship apps are actually running into similar issues as dating apps. It's a very unnatural way to meet someone one-on-one, and friend-making apps are also inundated with scammers. A lot of people reported feeling more alone than they did before when they tried a friendship-making app and it didn't work. But what I will say is young people, specifically young people who are moving to a new city, they opt to use Facebook groups instead. I think it's a lot easier to vet people on Facebook, and I can imagine that chatting on a really large group chat can sort of muster up the confidence to message someone individually. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the loneliness epidemic and paradox, I want to talk more about how the digital age has impacted the way we make friends. I just discussed running clubs, and now I want to discuss the death of the work best friend, the metaphorical death, not the physical death. Now, obviously, I want to pad this segment of this video out with 1,000,001 disclaimers. I know how the optics look. A full-time YouTuber is talking about working in the office. I have actually never worked in an office before. Before I did YouTube, I was a beautician. I have a beautician background. You know, I am going to be talking about remote working and hybrid working, but I just want to make it clear that this segment of this video is neither pro-remote working nor anti-remote working. Different strokes for different folks. There's benefits and drawbacks to both. It's more a discussion on how the pandemic and technology has impacted the way that people make friends, and one of those places is the workplace. Since the start of the pandemic, a vast majority of office workplaces have opted for completely remote or hybrid working models. Whether this is to boost employee morale, whether it's to save costs on office space. Also, remote working is just really convenient. It helps you have a better work-life balance because you're not wasting an hour and a half commuting to and from work. Like, what's better than being able to do your own laundry, meal prep, go to the doctors, or whilst you're on the clock. I'm not anti-remote working by any means, but I do want to discuss the impact that remote working has had on making a work best friend. I find discussing work friendships really interesting. It is quite a controversial topic, and just for some context on my situation, I do have a team. We have researcher Leanne, editor Kat, but a vast majority of the time I work alone. Before this, I was a beautician, and let me tell you guys, when I was a beautician, at least for a good year, I worked with essentially my best friends. It was the most fun ever. My job was kind of the trenches. I worked for not a very good company, but at least we all had each other. You know, I loved my old work friends, but also I understand that not everyone feels this way. A lot of people argue that they go to work for that exact reason, to work. They are not here to make friends. This isn't Friend Island, this is Love Island. But with this current office hybrid working system, it's actually harder than ever to make friends at work. I read this really interesting article by Lindsay Ellis on the Wall Street Journal. Americans are breaking up with their work friends. Lindsay shares that of the 2,000 American hybrid workers surveyed by Gallup, 17% said they had a work best friend, which has dropped from 22% in 2019. And this is mostly driven by remote working. It's harder to build connections with people when you don't physically see them 5 days a week. But also it's probably partially driven by the fact that a lot of people don't have any desire to make friends at work. And they want to keep their working life and their personal life as two very separate entities. Another thing which I don't see spoken about that often is that there probably is a decline in workplace friendships because people are changing jobs a lot more often now. Companies have much higher turnover rates because they just don't treat their employees that well anymore. There is far less of an initiative or driving force to go the extra mile at work or go into the office 5 days a week or try and build strong relationships with your co-workers or your boss, because it most likely won't result in a promotion or a raise or a bonus like it used to back in the good old days. And high turnover rates, they don't just apply to office jobs and 9-to-5s, they apply to all jobs across the board. You know, just to put it into context, in 2023, the UK's employee turnover rate was estimated to be 35.6%, which is a 7.7% increase since 2019. And the US employee turnover rate is even higher at 46.8%, which is a 9.6% increase since 2019. And again, I'm not going to sit here and try and say whether people should prioritize having work best friends or not. Again, it's completely personal to your situation. You know, I loved my old work friends. We hung out outside of work all the time, but also it's important to note that we were all girls, we were all the same age, we were all in beauty. We all had a lot in common. Essentially what I'm trying to say is that I've never worked with boring people. So of course I had a great time with my old colleagues, which just isn't the case for a lot of people. Just to read an excerpt from Lindsay's article, I don't want to put in 8, 9, 10 hours and go out and have a beer and talk about work for another 4 hours, says Mr. Trotter, a 53-year-old database administrator in Cupertino, California. Mr. Trotter says that the after-work socializing he used to do on occasion felt draining and cut deeper into his time with his family. In his new, largely remote position, he says he has no interest in building work friendships. After 2 years, he says he has met 2 teammates in person and only for a few minutes each. But if we can just tie this all in with running clubs and sober living, something which I'm really interested in when it comes to remote working and decline of the work best friend is the death of the work Friday night out. Yeah, I'm talking about the important stuff here, and I did some research on the ground, aka I asked my friends who work in offices, and hybrid remote working has had an impact on the Friday work night out because most people work from home on Fridays. You know, before the pandemic, before remote working, you would go out for drinks with your colleagues on a Friday and get absolutely battered and have no worries about the next day because you didn't have work. Anecdotes that I've read, you'd end up on a randomer's sofa at 2 a.m. and that's where the real connections were made. Now work drinks happen on a Thursday and my friends who work in offices say that it's just not the same. You know, it doesn't have the same je ne sais quoi of ending up on a randomer's sofa at 2 a.m. Isn't that what life's all about? I find it all absolutely fascinating, and I know that the crux of people's social lives are not their co-workers, but this newfound isolation from our co-workers is perhaps a wider symptom of the loneliness epidemic in general. How the digital age is disrupting the traditional way that we used to make friends. Regardless of how you feel about being friends with your co-workers or not, we can all admit that things are changing. And this is the nitty-gritty of the video. Across the board, younger generations are reporting feeling more lonely than ever, struggling to make friends, having less friends than previous generations. And I want to explore why this is. Is this a fault of a system? Is this because of the pandemic? Is this because of the digital age? Or are young people more willing participants in their isolation than we realize? As I mentioned earlier, office jobs now becoming more hybrid roles has absolutely impacted the way that people make friends at work. And essentially people have one less participation group than they did just 5 years ago. Whether people want to be involved in that participation group is a whole other question. But if we just sort of stay on this topic of like the pandemic's impact on socialization, it has been reported that the pandemic and young people spending a good few years of their life locked away has almost stunted people's socialization skills. People are reporting feeling a bit more awkward, struggling to make conversation, struggling to make small talk. But some people will argue that lockdown has been over for a few years now. So what other reasons are there for Gen Z and millennials feeling lonely? Now we got to circle back to The Paradox of Loneliness by Olga Kazan. This was such a brilliant article. It helped me so much with my research. I thought it was genius. And Olga shares that Americans, they do have friends. They just don't really see them. Americans spend less than 3 hours per week with friends, down from 6 hours just a decade earlier. And in 2021, older millennials had 16 less minutes of leisure time than adults of the same age in 2003. Why is this? Well, it is a lot harder to foster community now than it was even 20 years ago. Nowadays, due to socioeconomic circumstances and the job market, people are more likely to change jobs, people are more likely to move house and move areas and be priced out of areas that they grew up in or spent their early 20s in. Olga Kazan describes that a lot of people have disconnected connections. They have a lot of people who they know, but all of the people they know don't know each other. So let's say you have 3 friends and you know them, but they don't know each other. You then have to schedule 3 separate link-ups, 3 separate meetings to see them. You can't organize a big group hangout. So you have to plan something around 3 different schedules and your own schedule. And although social media and technology has made it easier to stay connected with our friends, it's still a pretty laborious endeavor trying to organize seeing an adult friend. But if we just circle back to socioeconomic circumstances impacting friendship, this wouldn't be a jordantheresa video unless we spoke about class. Olga's article really highlighted how socioeconomic circumstances can impact making and sustaining friendships. A survey of over 6,000 Americans found that college-educated Americans are more likely to host friends in their home at least once per month compared to non-college educated Americans. And to quote Olga directly, although everyone these days is pressed for time and less likely to be civically involved, the college educated live near the kinds of places where they're likely to see the same set of people repeatedly. Cox found that college graduates have greater access to public libraries, parks, coffee shops, and other third places than people without college degrees do. And people who had more access to these kinds of spaces, aka wealthier people, also tended to have more friends. People with money and regular work hours can see friends at Orange Theory or their local bar, Cox said, whereas those who work long days, multiple jobs, or erratic schedules might not be able to. Americans without college degrees are also now less likely than those with a degree to attend religious services, thus losing an opportunity to be around friends for free. And hoping to run into friends in the neighborhood is a long shot. Only a quarter of Americans say most or all of their close friends live in their neighborhood or nearby. And if we just circle back to hosting for a moment, because this is something that really caught my attention whilst writing this video, and I read this really interesting article in The Atlantic. What a shock. I'm an Atlantic stan. I will say, if you guys really want to have like some good in-depth long reading about friendship, highly recommend reading The Atlantic. There's so many articles about friendship on there. But there was a really interesting article on there about the decline of dining rooms. And I'm not just talking about walled off dining rooms, because who the hell has an extra room to put a table in? You know, a lot of people in their apartments, in their house shares, don't even have space for a dining table and chairs. People opt to eat in their bedrooms or eat on their desk because, you guessed it, the housing crisis. But if we just relate this back to my life, I live in London and I feel very grateful to live in the same city as all of my friends and my family. And also I live in a city that has honestly excellent public transport. But because of the housing crisis, all of my friends live scattered all around the city. Now, obviously it's natural for all of my friends to live in completely different pockets of the city, but people are being pushed more and more to the outskirts as housing costs go up and up and up and up. Most of my friends live in house shares, which means they can't really host. And it's really difficult to host because you essentially have to ask for like 3 other people's permission. Some of my friends don't even have living rooms because the living room has been turned into an extra bedroom by the landlord. And let's say you do live with your friends and you can host. Most of my friends, me included, live in apartment blocks. So we have to be conscious of noise complaints. And I was thinking a lot about how renting has impacted the class makeup of this city, because what I found is that renting alongside with gentrification has turned areas in London into complete melting pots where people from different classes now all live in the same area. And not just that, but people of different classes live in the same apartment building. You know, some people own, others rent, others are in a house share. And this does cause tension when an older upper class woman is living in the same building as a house share with 3 working class young professionals in the same building as a middle class young couple with a baby. And just a quick side note, I read another really good article in The Atlantic about rich people's hatred of noise. This article is by Xochitl Gonzalez, and to quote Xochitl directly, "I find many city noises nerve-wracking and annoying. Jackhammers doing street maintenance, the beeping of reversing trucks, cars honking for no good reason. Yet these noises account for a small minority of all noise complaints. Nearly 60% of recent grievances center what I'd consider lifestyle choices, music and parties and people talking loudly. But one person's loud is another person's expression of joy. As my grandmother used to say, I'm not yelling, this is just how I talk." In 1991, the NYPD launched Operation Soundtrap, a campaign in which cops would trawl the streets, often in majority black and brown communities, hunting for and confiscating cars with enhanced stereo systems. "If they don't turn down the volume, we'll turn off their ignition," the chief of police department vowed. When Rudy Giuliani became mayor in 1994, he used a cabaret license law to force clubs out of gentrifying neighborhoods like the Lower East Side and Chelsea. The battle against nightlife continued during the Bloomberg years. New York was effectively codifying an elite sonic aesthetic, the systemic elevation of quiet over noise. And this reminded me a lot of London because I spoke about this in my Brat Summer video. Nightlife in this country is in crisis. Nightlife in this city is in crisis. A lot of nightlife venues want to extend their hours past midnight, but the council keeps blocking it, won't allow it, and mostly it's got to do with residents in the area complaining about noise. And not only that, but residents will move into luxury apartment blocks in nightlife hubs like Camden and Dalston and then complain about the noise. You know, now that I've discussed factors outside of our control that impact the way that we make friends, I want to get a little more messy, because some people would argue that people do play a part and facilitate their own loneliness. And I think this is something that we should talk about. I think it's interesting. Before we get into the emotional labor of it all, I really want to talk about how our accessibility to entertainment has absolutely impacted the way that we make friends and our desire to make friends. We now have entertainment at our fingertips. We have tens of hundreds of hours of TV shows to binge and watch, thousands of TikToks, tweets, Instagram stories to mindlessly scroll through and let the hours fly past. We can communicate with our friends however much we like, completely to our heart's desire. And I want to make it very clear that I don't think any of these things are inherently bad, but I do really think that this is impacting how much we socialize. I do think that we are less likely to put ourselves out there. We are less likely to make the effort to see friends, to join participation groups, because we can entertain ourselves so easily now. And at least, I don't know, I'd say maybe like 50% of the drive to socialize is out of boredom. But if we just get back onto the topic at hand. 10 years ago, Dolly Alderton spoke to Grazia about what she calls as friend culling. Dolly Alderton wrote Good Material, which is a book I really enjoyed. She also wrote Everything I Know About Love, which I haven't read, but it did spawn a lot of viral TikTok audios. The one specific one that probably comes to everyone's mind is Everything I Know About Love I know through my long-term relationships with women. In this article, Dolly shares this story about how she cut this friend out of her life because she viewed this friend as someone who was only close to her when she had an event going on and needed to fill up the invites, or when she knew Dolly herself was going to be having an event and wanted to be invited. And one day on the phone, Dolly told this friend that they aren't really close friends. That was nearly a year ago, the beginning of my friend cull odyssey, and I've never felt better. Somewhere along the line, I think we've become a little promiscuous with our friendships. Social media is partly to blame, allowing us to believe that we are bonded to masses of people simply because they've tweeted about what type of mattress they just bought or Facebooked about how they claimed to vote in the general election. I think we need to go back to basics and redefine what friend means. Think about how many Facebook friends you have. Mine currently stands at 1,026, the same population as the capital city of Bermuda. This is quite frankly, ridiculous. And Jean Smith, a social anthropologist, tells me it's also impossible. That follows a larger trend in society about quantity over quality, and it's about short-term fixes. But it's a false illusion, she explains. Once you get past 150 in your tribe, you can't really look after everyone. This comes from Dunbar's number, a suggested limit of the number of friendships humans can sustain. 150 is the average circle of casual friends. 50 close friends, 15 you can confide in, then an intimate circle of 5 closest friends. This circle, Jean tells me, is the most important. They're the ones who make up your happiness and your world. Recently, I saw my very popular friend Beth and we got onto the subject of how difficult it is to divide real friends from social climbers. Beth admitted, I made a color-coded spreadsheet of all my friends and how often I saw them. My closest friends were green, second closest were magenta, and close acquaintances were orange. Only when I put it on paper did I realize how I was misspending my time. Now, I do see where Dolly is coming from in this article because she is specifically referencing social climbers or who she views as social climbers, but I do think this article from nearly 10 years ago does represent young people's growing disillusionment with their friendships. This year, at UXSyn tweeted, "You guys must think friendship is just going for brunch, going on trips together, and taking pictures of each other." And this tweet has over 1,000 likes. And this is a subject I wanted to dive into a little deeper because I see the notion of friendships should serve you being shared a lot and, you know, cutting off relationships in your life that no longer serve you. And essentially how low stakes ties can be grouped in as friends that don't serve you. And I am here to defend low stakes ties. Although Dolly's article was written nearly a decade ago, I don't think it's any coincidence that conversations around friendship culling and cutting off friendships that don't serve you has come about during a cultural peak of friendship. We are now having more conversations, reading more articles and books, watching movies and TV shows which center around the importance of friendship and how friends can be just as much of the love of our lives as romantic partners can be. But if we just notice the friendships that get pedestaled by this kind of media are best friends, our platonic soulmates, our platonic life partners. And because of this, I think that some people are concluding that friendships that don't serve them in that way, friendships where you aren't deeply bonded with one another, are friendships which aren't worth having in our lives at all. And this is something I completely disagree with. A low stakes friendship or tie is a friend of yours who isn't a close friend. They aren't someone you could really rely on. You know, they aren't someone who you would go to for help, but also you wouldn't do the same for them either. The key to low stakes friendship is the fact that they're mutual. The low stakes only really works if it's low stakes on both sides. They're either someone you see at big group gatherings or they're someone who you go for dinner or drinks with a few times a year. You know, you can go months without talking, you can go weeks without replying to them and it's fine. There's never any beef because they will do the same thing to you as well. These friendships, yeah, they do feel a little shallow, but also shallow isn't necessarily bad. It's impossible to be close or best friends with every single person in your life. You don't have the time, nor the energy, nor the connection with everyone. But once again, friendships don't need to be close in order for them to be worthy of your time. To quote Serena Smith for Days Digital in defense of low stakes friendships, in 1973, Mark Granavetta, a sociology professor at Stanford University, published a hugely influential paper called The Strength of Weak Ties. Before Granavetta published his research, it was widely assumed that a person's well-being depended mainly on the quality of relationships with close friends and family. But Granavetta argued and proved that the quantity of relationships also matters, and that weak ties are just as important to us as strong ties. More recently, a Harvard study published in 2022 even found that having a mix of strong and weak social ties, known as relational diversity, leads to greater life satisfaction. And during the throes of the pandemic and lockdown, people did express that they really did miss the people who they weren't necessarily expecting to miss, / people that they weren't particularly close with. They miss the people they sort of knew of their lives, you know, friends of friends, people they saw at parties, that one friend that they go for drinks with twice a year, their, you know, partner's best friend's partner. These aren't people that we necessarily shared really strong emotional bonds with, but these are people that we had good times with. And isn't that what friendship's all about? These were people who contributed to our happiness. These were people who were part of our communities. I read a really brilliant Substack by Malvika on low stakes friendships. To quote her directly, "To understand this trend, we need to examine the cultural forces that have shaped it. The rise of social media has created a culture of performative friendship, where the depth of one's connections is often measured by the frequency of interactions and the intensity of shared experiences. Simultaneously, the self-help industry has boomed, popularizing psychological concepts and therapeutic language. These factors have converge to create a perfect storm of over-intellectualization in our personal relationships. We've been conditioned to believe that every interaction must be deep, meaningful, and emotionally productive. But in our quest to optimize our friendships, we may be losing sight of what friendship is fundamentally about: feeling good in each other's company. And perhaps this partially contributes to why we're such a lonely generation, because people are spending more time quantifying and categorizing their relationships than actually enjoying each other's company. Transactionality is where friendships go to keel over and die. Not everything is supposed to be tit for tat. You aren't supposed to spend the period of time after you've done a friend a favor waiting for that favor to be returned. I think this is where we can start discussing emotional labor discourse. Before the pandemic, actually, in 2019, this Twitter thread went viral, instructing people on how to set boundaries with their friends. If a friend ever reached out for help and you weren't in the headspace to help them or give them advice or listen to them, do not fret. You can just use this template. Hey, I'm so glad you reached out. I'm actually at capacity / helping someone else who's in crisis / dealing with some personal stuff right now, and I don't think I can hold appropriate space for you. Wait. Shut up. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Holding space with that.
I didn't know that was happening.
Could we connect later date at later time instead? / do you have someone else you could reach out to? This is just one example of emotional labor discourse. And emotional labor is another one of those pop psychology terms that has been used so much that it's strayed so far from its original meaning. The term emotional labor was coined by sociologist Arlie Hochschild in 1983 and was completely unrelated to friendship. It was actually related to the workplace. You know, it referred to displaying certain emotions to meet requirements of a job. Think customer-facing roles when people have to be friendly and upbeat all the time. And think about women who hold more senior positions in offices are often expected to take on more caregiving roles to their co-workers and also the people who work for them. It was never related to providing emotional support to your friends during trying times. Applying the term emotional labor to our friendships implies that friendships are work, which is something that I just don't think is true. Listening to your friend vent about their boyfriend is not the same as having to be extremely friendly and upbeat at your job for 8 hours. You know, emotionally supporting your friends is rewarding, and that reward is friendship. You know, the reward is intimacy, and this idea that whatever emotional labor you put into your friendships must be returned by a specific time is a very capitalistic way of looking at things. It doesn't factor in the complexities of our lives, the complexities of us as human beings. That template was the most robotic. There's a word I'm looking for. Oh my God. There's a specific word that I'm looking for. I'm pretty sure it begins with an A. It basically means when something's artificial. No, that's kind of not it. It could take 5 minutes for a friend to return the favor, or it could take 5 years, but this shouldn't matter as long as you're enjoying each other's company in the meantime. And friendship is just something that you're not supposed to be keeping tabs on. Now, I will say that in this current cultural climate, people do have a tendency to dunk on individuals who don't prioritize friendship in their lives. Either they prioritize romantic relationships, they jump from relationship to relationship, or they really want to be in a relationship. But we can't really blame people for thinking or feeling like this when friendship is probably the least prioritized friendship in our current society. If your best friend dies, you don't get bereavement leave. If your best friend ends up in hospital, you won't be able to see them unless you're a spouse or you're a relative. There are no legal protections for friendships in place. There are no scripts or guidelines on how friendships should progress. In fact, living with a best friend into your 30s and 40s is almost seen as a bit immature. Not having a romantic relationship in your 30s and 40s is seen as a sign that you're falling behind. Hopefully these attitudes are changing, but they have absolutely had an impact. And if you're two best friends of the opposite sex, or you're two best friends who are queer, a lot of people just assume that you are secretly in love with each other, or there's unrequited feelings, or you're going to end up together, or you're secretly in a relationship. Trust me, I know. I have a best friend who's a guy. Society very rarely lets friendships just be. They are either something of youth, or they reflect some kind of stuntedness. And what I find really interesting about this is that it didn't always used to be like this. I read another brilliant article in The Atlantic. God, 5 stars The Atlantic. This is by Raina Cohen. What if friendship, not marriage, was at the center of life? And if you guys are going to read any article, read this one. This one literally nearly brought tears to my eyes. I absolutely loved this article. I can only lightly touch on what she discusses because I just don't have time. But Raina highlights the romantic friendships of the 19th century, friendships between those of the same sex who would not only be physically affectionate with one another, but would write each other love letters, poems, and essays. And of course, we're never going to know how much of these friendships were just friendships and how much was a little bit more. You know, how many of these were, hidden queer romantic relationships. But men and women's social circles were so separated from one another that, of course, people of the same sex began forming deep emotional bonds with each other. And men of this time believed that affectionate, strong relationships between women was essentially a good way to train themselves up to be a good wife. Men rarely felt threatened by these relationships because the women in their lives were often economically tied to them. But as men and women's social circles began to mix and women became more economically independent from the men in their lives and their husbands, men began to get their backs up a little bit about the close relationships that women had with each other. And affectionate same-sex friendships became more and more stigmatized. And as the romantic friendship began to crumble, marriage began to take on a whole new form. To quote Raina Cohen for The Atlantic, a few decades after the erosion of romantic friendship began, Americans' conception of marriage shifted. The Northwestern University psychologist Eli Finkel identifies three distinct eras in American marriages. The first, running from the colonial period until about 1850, had a pragmatic focus on fulfilling spouses' economic and survival needs. The second, lasting until about 1965, emphasized love. Finkel makes the case that starting around 1965, the self-expressive marriage became the ideal. Spouses expected their partnership to be the site of self-discovery and personal growth. Excluded from these structures for most of the nation's existence were the tremendous number of Americans who were denied access to legal marriage, namely enslaved Black Americans, interracial couples, and same-sex couples. Throughout this evolution, Americans started relying more and more on their spouses for social and emotional support, with friendships consigned to a secondary role. And if we just, sorry, it's literally getting so dark, but if we just stay on the topic of marriage for just a moment longer, what I noticed whilst writing this video is how friendships take essentially the biggest tumble after marriage and children enter the picture. People simply don't have the time to maintain friendships anymore when they are married and when they have children. And a part of me does question if families, specifically mothers, were given more support in child rearing and family building, affordable and accessible childcare, affordable housing near their loved ones, appropriate maternity and paternity leave, could friendships be better maintained and could communities be fostered more easily? This has been an absolute pleasure to make this video. I really enjoyed writing it. I know it was a bit like hodgepodge and all over the place, but it really felt like a labor of love. But something I want to wrap this video up on is the healing powers of platonic love. One thing that I didn't want to do with this video is make people feel any shame in struggling to make friends or sustain friends or not having that many friends or, struggling to prioritize friendship in their lives. As I've spoken about in this video, look at the material. There are so many factors outside of our control in why sustaining friendships is so difficult, especially for Gen Z and millennials. But I think why friendship holds such an important place in my heart is, as I mentioned earlier, I went through a breakup this year and my friends really pulled through during my time of need. But aren't friendships the most unconditional relationships of all? There is nothing tying you to friendships, no romantic feelings, sex, children, familial ties. You spend time with your friends because you really want to. You love your friends because you want to. And isn't that the most unconditional love of all? But yes, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Once again, guys, welcome to daylight savings era of the Theresa channel. This is going to be happening more often. But yes, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I had so much fun making it. I did literally write this video in about 4 days. So I'm feeling very yeah, I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I love talking about friendship so much. But yes, I hope you guys enjoyed just some of my thoughts on this and I'll see you soon for another video. Bye.